everyone. Welcome back to the Dan Nessel Show. I'm your host, Dan Nessel. Today I am really pleased to bring you somebody that I like to call a triple threat. And I mean that in a good way. She is an executive coach who is a lawyer who has an advanced degree in psychology. Add to that an entrepreneurial spirit, a genuine desire to serve, and frankly, a dynamic personality, which is going to definitely come out during this conversation I've had with her. She's the president of Masterman Executive Coaching. She's the incoming president of the International Coaching Federation of New England. I'm so excited to welcome to the show, Beth Masterman. I came across Beth, or I reached out to Beth in the last couple of months as I was trying to expand my own network and thinking about like professionals who are very successful in their fields, who at least it was LinkedIn indicated thus. And, I reached out to Beth in part of my, my growth of my coaching and consulting knowledge. And Beth was so kind to spend some time with me, back a couple months ago. And we hit it off. I felt after that conversation, it was one of those conversations where I had a list of to-dos after it was done. And I learned so much just in the short amount of time that I wanted to bring Beth on and kind of talk to all of you. But as I talked to her back in November, I felt that she just got me. I felt that Beth just got me, and I hope that you get that too, listeners. So anyway, I've gone on a little too long here, but Beth, thank you so much for being here. How you doing?
Good, thank you, and thank you so much for having me and for those really generous comments. I was excited when you reached out to me because I love it when LinkedIn comes to life.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. And thank you for this invitation.
Well, it's amazing. LinkedIn kind of delivers in so many ways if you pay attention. And we were just talking before we started talking here about, when you open up to the universe and you listen, it delivers. And part of that is by design, I think, on LinkedIn, especially where if you have a good set of connections, if the people that you know now are generally good people, you assume that you're connecting with people that you know and trust, then the people that they know and trust are naturally going to be, the chances are that they're good people too. So I've been very fortunate that way. And Beth and I are connected by a few different people, and here we are.
Here we are.
Yeah. I wanted to bring everybody into this whole thing we're talking about just before we started. 2020 was a rough year. Nobody would disagree. And how the new year is kind of just an arbitrary date in on a calendar. Nothing has changed between this week and last week as far as our actual situation right now. But yet, you told me, as you said, 2021 already seems to have a placebo effect on us. Like, why do you think that is? I mean, how have you seen that happen already in day 5 of the year?
Well, first, I would say that 2020 has been referred to as the great slowing down and the great opening up. And it isn't really a coincidence that it was 2020, because it was a year where we could really improve our vision of ourselves, of the world around us, what our values are. And I think part of the feeling of hope and renewal now that it's 2021 is that, there are some concrete changes that are going to come into effect by the end of January. And attached to those is a palpable feeling of hope that some of the most devastating parts of 2020 will start to abate. But it's going to take some time.
Yeah. Do you think people are a little, right now you said it's like a placebo effect for sure. Do you think people might be a little too optimistic about it, or do you feel the opposite way, that people are still really cynical and waiting for things to happen?
Well, as you might imagine, I haven't really seen a lot of people.
Me neither.
Because I'm in my house.
Yeah.
But no, I think that we've all been a little traumatized.
Yeah.
And like the lion in the cage, when you open the door, I think we're all probably going to have some trepidation about fully stepping out. I just think there's a great sense of relief that we're turning a corner.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, as we speak, the vaccines are being rolled out for sure. And
yes,
even though I don't know how far down the list I'll be on this, fortunately, probably pretty far. From my own health history, but for those of you out there who are going to go out there and get stuck, I hope to see you soon.
Yes,
because
definitely.
it's gonna really change the way we.
Yeah, come visit. Come visit once you get your vaccine.
Yeah, once you get your vaccine, absolutely. I'll happy to be associated with people again. It'll be a lot of fun. But look, I mean, it's been a strange and crazy year, and you know, I think it's been a really good year though for those folks who are in the business of helping people get through those tough times.
Yes.
And you know, obviously, healthcare workers, psychologists, and so on, dealing with some serious trauma and some serious things that I have the utmost respect for. I think coaches have played an incredibly important role as well. My own experience in the last year working with a coach or two have my listeners know. I mean, this is why I'm podcasting now. It was a coach that helped me see the right direction. And it was a coach that helped me see that, maybe what I wanted professionally was in a certain direction and not another direction.
Hmm.
So I've gotten so much of, I hate to say value. It sounds like I bought it in the store, but I've gotten so much personal growth and satisfaction from my relationships with the coaches I've been working with. Beth, as a coach, how have you seen the year, and what are the big issues that you've been dealing with? And, how has your practice been going?
My practice has remained steady, which is I'm grateful for.
Yeah.
And because I'm not working in the healthcare field or the health and wellness field, I haven't really had to deal with prolonged trauma
Mhm.
of the pandemic. I mean, those coaches who were doing health and wellness coaching, working with the frontline workers, I mean, those poor folks are living with sustained trauma. It's just amazing, and it's now worse than it was. So they're going to have to recover before they realize the gifts of 2020, and for them 2021 as well.
Yeah.
But in my work with executives or senior leaders, the issues haven't really changed that much,
Mhm.
other than helping people become more comfortable with the technology. How do you run a meeting? How do you keep your team engaged? How do they get comfortable on Zoom? So that's the part that is directly connected to working from home.
Yeah.
But the challenges of leadership are the challenges of leadership.
The idea of like remote work in general has been around for a long time, but I would imagine it's putting a lot of, well, I don't even have to imagine. Certainly in my experience, it's put a lot of stress on teams within my own company. And, executives having to lead without being in person.
Hmm.
It's interesting. It feels like people need to be developing new skill sets for that to happen, or maybe it's just enhancing existing ones. Have you come across this a lot in your work?
What I find that there are a lot of assumptions that people have come to believe are truths,
Mm,
and they're not truths. For example, there are a lot of companies that doubted whether people would work well
mhm.
and be productive if they were working from home. And that hindered a lot of parents who wanted to work from home part time, because the assumption at work was, oh, no, you're not really working unless you're in the office, unless I can see you. So that's just an example of an assumption about how people work and about how people lead that have just dissolved, dissolved into a reality that we're facing now.
Yeah.
The challenges of leadership are the same in that you never really know what to expect, and you're tested as a leader when you are dealing with the unexpected. And so this is an example of the unexpected. And so the leader has to be agile. The leader has to figure out a way to adapt quickly so that he or she can help their team also adapt. Again, that's just a challenge of leadership,
Yeah.
to not get triggered by sudden change management.
It's well, certainly that was writ large this past year. It makes me think like, what has been the, I guess the, I don't want to call it a litmus test, but the real kind of core skills that have been like really come to the fore, that have developed over the last year, or that had to come out over the last year to separate the wheat from the chaff in some ways among executives? And you work with executives across different industries. Have there been commonalities in like the skills and the mindsets that have been the difference between like I don't want to say success and failure, but certainly some measure of achievement and struggle?
That's a hard question because,
Yeah.
I don't really do a survey.
Mm-hmm.
And those folks who choose to work with a coach are typically people who are self aware and are courageous and know how to ask for help when they need it. So that's a certain type of leader. As a coach, we are always encouraged to do a lot of self reflection and self development so that we don't get in our own way when we're working with a client. And so, just in my own experience, trying to figure out how can I adapt quickly so that when somebody calls on me to support them, I'm not getting in my own way because I don't like Zoom, or or I'm uncomfortable with this or that. And I think the challenge across the board with my clients is to focus on what is now.
Mm.
Don't be nostalgic about what was. You can't have it. And don't be eager for this so called new normal. Don't be eager for things to be over and to change because you've got no control of that. So I
Mhm.
say to them, look, you were dropped on a desert island, survive. You can't get off, and you have no idea when you're going to be rescued. Make it work. This is your life. And I think
Yeah.
that has been the challenge, to try to contain this moment in our lives and master it, because my clients are successful, strong leaders, and they're not there by accident. It's not like they're
Yeah.
the boss's son or daughter. They have earned their right to be in leadership. And so what did they do to get there? And now that they're there, we're here. It's now. How do you want to be
Yeah.
right now?
I'm glad you brought that up because it segues a little bit into one of the points I wanted to just to explore with you a little bit. This idea of mastering the now, versus digging into the past or worrying too much about the future. When we first talked, you were one of the first people that I ever really had a substantive discussion with about the differences between coaching, consulting, psychology, these psychoanalysis. There's
Mm-hmm.
different sections, different. They're very different things. I
Mm-hmm.
think is the point. And coaching is the now. Right? Coaching is what. Can you kind of explore a little bit the difference between these three
Sure.
things, and how when somebody's, let me stack it a little bit for you, so that when people are looking for to help, looking for help with either whatever problems they're having now or whatever, to think about, like, when is a coach appropriate? When should they be looking at at psychoanalysis, and when should they be looking for a consultant?
All right. Well, I'll start with a visual. So,
Mhm.
if listeners, you can draw a line in front of you, and on the left end, put psychologists, therapy, psychotherapy. And on the right
Mhm.
end, put consulting. And coaching is in the middle. So, on the left end, in psychotherapy, the focus is on the past. What did you experience, and what has distracted you for so long since you've been young that it has a life of its own, and it has a pull of its own that is getting in the way of you living a full life? And although, therapy, like cognitive behavioral therapy, there are modes of therapy that urge a person to act and create new habits, much of the focus is on the past. We said, I was told in coach training, it's like following the trail of tears.
Mhm.
And it's fine and it's good. And we all know about it. And if we haven't been in therapy, we know someone who has. So that's just the focus. On the other end of the spectrum is consulting. So a consultant is hired because you need their expertise. So a lawyer, a doctor, I mean, those are really high-end consultants, but a business consultant, a financial planner, they have expertise in something that you need. And so they promise you that if you work with them, they're going to help you solve that particular problem.
Mhm.
It can be a very close relationship, an intimate, fraught relationship for the purpose of achieving that goal. But it's a skill and a field that you just don't have, and you hire somebody for their expertise. Coaching is an equal relationship. The expert in coaching is the client, because the presumption is that you are successful and you are whole and you have within you the answers to how you can live your best life. And coaching is a question based approach, questioning
Mhm.
whatever comes up at the session to help clients discover who they want to be. And that means take into account where you are now. And how does that affect your values? What are your values? How does that affect where you want to be? And now, if you can get an idea of where you want to be and where you are now, what's the gap? How do you want to bridge the gap? So the coach asks questions to root you in the now with whatever baggage from the past you bring in, whatever hopes and dreams or beliefs you have about where you're going, because those are not real anymore. What's real is now. And we look at now and we explore and we come up with, okay, well, what's your very next step? And we do little steps. And when they're after the coaching session, they will try things and come back either having accomplished or not. And it doesn't matter because there's never any judgment. If they accomplish something, it's, oh, wow, well, what was that like for you? And if they didn't, it's, oh, wow, well, what got in the way? And everything is just interesting and good and relevant.
So, do you ever blend those practices across? Like, is there ever a time when the coach should or could be a consultant, or is there ever a time when I don't want to dig into psychology because that requires licensure and so on. But is there ever a time where you need to be blending these three
Well,
things?
I can dig into this psychology for this reason.
Yeah.
Because it's a medical model and there is a license and it's a regulated practice, there are certain protections that a client has in psychotherapy that they don't have in coaching, which is a privilege. So when you are speaking with a therapist, everything you talk about, and they take lots of notes, is privileged unless you're going to be harming yourself or harm to others. Same thing when you're with a doctor or a lawyer, the conversations are privileged. It's not the case with a coach. So a therapist has a unique problem. They have to decide whether they want to have that client as a coaching client or as a psychotherapy client. Also, coaches don't take insurance. And they have to make very clear to themselves and to the client what they're doing, how they're listening, how they're serving the client. Because if they say coach and they're in the habit of taking a lot of notes and digging deep, deep, deep into the inner sanctums of the human being, if there is ever a reason why those notes come into litigation, they're all
Mhm.
open to be subpoenaed. Okay,
Yeah.
so a therapist has
Mhm.
to think of that.
That's serious. Mhm.
The way that psychotherapy issues have come into the room, and it happened to me just very recently, is that a client who is struggling with depression, and for whatever reasons, which we're trying to figure out why now, what's in the way now of that person taking every step possible to see whether or not they can live a better life.
Mhm.
And so one of the fears was, well, I'm afraid that if I try different antidepressants and they don't work, then there won't be anything that will work. So I said,
Mm.
well, what you're saying is that if you try the antidepressants, the worst that can happen is you will be like you are right now if nothing works.
Right.
You're never going to know.
Yeah.
But I wasn't advocating that this client do it or not. My role is simply to point out the contradictions, to try to help that person make a decision that's not based on pride or based on fear, but based on evaluating the options. Okay, so now I'm working with this person who is and knows that they're depressed.
Yeah.
And so if the person chooses to get medicated, well, I'll deal with that person as they show up. And if not, then we have to figure out another way to help cope with the darkness of depression and the behaviors that come out of that when at work. Okay.
Yeah.
If that person became incapable of doing work or incapable of working in coaching, then I would say, I really think you need to straighten this out before we can get any value out of our time together. So
Yeah.
the coaching client has to be high functioning enough.
Mm.
And then in consulting, because I think there's a lot of consultants consulting in a coach, it's very hard not to give advice because most coaches have lived another professional life and have insights and life experience. It's very hard not to give advice. So I just use a technique saying, all right, well, if they say, well, what do you think? Or what do you think I should do? And I'll just say, well, let's come up with some options. Let's come up with 5 things. Number 1, I'll give you. You can do what you're doing now because that's a choice on some level. Now you come up with the next 3, and if you haven't said what I'm thinking, then I'll tell you what I'm thinking. And the reason for doing that is to stop myself from giving advice, which you're not supposed to do as a coach. And also, if I have information that's real, fact-based information that would be helpful to the client, I don't want to deprive the client of that. And I also don't want to deprive the client of the opportunity to think outside of the box, to stretch their mind, because that's what causes positive change, to get them to think in a different way.
Mm-hmm. When the client comes back after you do that exercise, by the way, I've written that down because that is, to me, brilliant. I'm going to use that a lot. Now that they come back to you and they've come up with their options, and your answer is not among their answers, or maybe the fact-based answer that is the truth, or is the right thing, not the right thing to do, but is factually correct.
Mm-hmm.
They don't come up with that. Then at that point, you would reveal that information.
Yeah, I'll tease them a little bit, and I'll say, I can think of one more thing.
Try
One
to
more
get them.
thing. And sometimes they'll get it close enough, but if they don't, then I will. I had an example the other day of somebody that did a webinar, and the average age of the person on the webinar giving the webinar was old, and the purpose in part was to promote their brand.
Mm.
And I thought, well, what might you do to promote a brand that you want to promote? And there were no women from this company. And so the person gave me many ideas about what they could do. And I just had to, at the end, what I said to them is, well, there were no women. Did you notice? Oh, yeah. And so I said, well, let's look at your law firm. Let's see who's there. And I started saying, well, what about this one? It was one woman, young woman. And this one, because they're natives, they know how to do a webinar pretty much and no social media. Oh, I never thought of that. Well, of course we should use her. It's just completely not in that person's awareness because it's a generational thing. And it's not because they don't value diversity or value their younger associates. They just don't think that way. And so that spurred some insight.
And that's interesting when you think about it in terms of either generationally, or a friend of mine would call it neurodiverse groups. There are kind of presets to the way that you approach things. The friend Michael Netzley, he was on one of my episodes a while back. He's a neuroscientist in Singapore, and he would say, or he might say in this case, that there is a default network in
Yes.
place in the brain, that is formed over time. But you can change it. You can't change the default network, but you can change the way that you react to things and your behaviors, based on a whole bunch of different things that, of course, I'm not a neuroscientist, so I don't know. But as far as that goes, it's that must come into play quite often, for you.
Well, it's that you create a new network. That's one of the
Mhm.
most encouraging insights I got when I went to my coach training, that they have found that we make new connections until we die, unless you have a brain disease or Alzheimer's or something like
Sure.
that. So you don't lose the old ones, but you can overlay with new ones. And if you
Yeah.
use the new ones and they bring you pleasure, it makes things feel better, feel easier. That is the dopamine, the reinforcing feeling
Mhm.
of, oh, this is easier, it feels good, that will lead you to do it again and again and again. It might take some intention
Mhm.
at first, but you can create new connections, new
Mhm.
networks.
It's that whole concept of being live wired.
Yes.
That's you continue to develop well into you're right,
Yeah,
until you
until
die, I
you die.
suppose. Yeah, and as being now classified as sort of, in the second half, I suppose. I'm so glad to know that. I feel like this podcast is one of the ways that I keep rewriting, or writing over my existing network, because I just keep learning and learning and learning, and the more I learn, the more I want to learn.
Yes.
And it's very encouraging to me, anyway, on a personal level, to just continue to kind of get excited about things.
Yes, I agree.
At the same time, it's a little distracting to get excited about things. You'll see behind me, my viewers can't see, but I have a stack of books. Like almost all the books that you see, Beth, are books I've gotten over the past 4 months. I haven't read all those
Mm-mm.
books. They're to be read, but mostly through conversations with folks like you, where I just come out of them like, I need to know more about
Mhm.
this. And then I have another conversation 3 days later. Oh, I need to know more about this.
Mhm.
So there's the lag time between what I need to know and what I do know is getting to be a little bit long. But I'm really excited because I have a lot of learning to do. And one of the things that you had turned me on to was, a family. Sorry, it's called
Internal family
Internal
systems.
Family. Yeah, I I am really excited about this particular, approach, because it makes a lot of sense to me. I'm only starting to kind of look into it, but can you talk about that a little bit, and how you might be, either applying it in your, not necessarily in your practice, or in your life in some way?
Mhm.
I think it's
It's
fascinating.
amazing. Richard Schwartz, he is the one that developed this theory of internal family systems. And if I had the time, I would totally go and get trained on it. It's incredible. But I mean, when I say the time, it's like a 2.5, 3 year investment of time to really become a practitioner. But the concepts are very easy to grasp and very profound. So the idea is that as we evolve, we are in the present when we're young, and particularly when there is a situation that is triggering. You are
Mhm.
in the moment and you have to react. And sometimes you can react well, and other times not. And sometimes you're reacting to severe trauma. Like, what if you have a parent who's abusive, or you
Sure.
suffer abuse in a variety of ways? Or what if you're just, miserable in school for a long time? I mean, there are a number of things that require us to cope. Then what happens in his theory is, when you're sort of done coping, you don't need to be on alert. That part of you kind of goes into hiding.
Mhm.
And if that part was particularly bad, I mean, you can just imagine, as bad as you want to imagine, but if you're really not proud of what it is you did, you're ashamed of what you did, and you're young enough, it will go so far into hiding that it will become kind of an exile.
Mm.
And every time it pops up, other parts of you will keep it down because it's too threatening to deal with. So, what about those other parts? We have parts of us that will protect us, parts of us that will propel us forward. And the idea of this internal family system is to say that all those different parts are independent and codependent. They are all part
Mhm.
of what makes us who we are. And as an adult, we talk to those parts in his type of therapy. So if you are afraid of public speaking, for example, you then try to bring forward that part of you, that version of you that's afraid of public speaking.
Mhm.
And then the present you talks to that person. Hey, what is it that has you so afraid? Oh, well, I'm afraid that the audience is going to, think I'm stupid, or I'm afraid I'm going to freeze. And okay, then you say, well, you know what? I totally understand your fears, but we've got this. You know, I've practiced. I know my speech. I mean, we've got this. So you can relax. I'll take care of it. And the idea
Mhm.
is to have an integrated adult self that really
Mhm.
is competent and can put those parts to rest, at peace. And you become a self leader. That's the goal.
Mhm.
A leader of yourself, and that's not just leading one person. It looks that way on the outside, but actually
Yeah.
self leadership is managing our complexity in its fullest, all these different parts.
And all these different parts, it sounds a little bit when you start to talk about it, and when you start to even read about it and listen about it, it's initially it sounds a little bit like this multiple
Yes.
personalities thing. And he does make it clear that it's not quite the same thing, but it's similar because, rather than dismiss those thoughts that we have or those fears that we have as, you know, uh, either irrelevant to who we are or as kind of, beliefs that we should just kind of, I guess, shun away. His point is to address them
Hmm.
as representations or as these different parts. He calls them parts, but it's easy to imagine it as people.
They
It's
are.
there's the fear guy, and there's the fear Dan, and there's the deferential Dan, and there's the very happy and excited, and you gotta, I guess, coming to I've only gotten a little bit into it, but the whole idea of that self, the core self being the leader, being kind of, that's where you want to get to, being the owner of all these parts,
Hmm.
is pretty exciting. It's pretty interesting, especially when you think about mindfulness and how, I do the Sam Harris stuff. I do the Sam Harris waking up meditations, and I've been listening to a really amazing mindfulness guy named Jay Abbasi, who's doing these mindfulness Mondays, and he, the whole idea of understanding that thoughts appear in consciousness and just recognize them, is wonderful, because it's like, it's natural. You have these thoughts. Okay, great. I see what it is. I see it's there. I can move on because I know it's there.
Hmm.
I'm not going to let it dominate my day. But Dr. Schwartz takes it further. It's not just seeing it's there, it's understanding that that is actually from a part of you, and then taking it to the next level and addressing it that way. I'm just scratching the surface here, but I think it's an exciting way to break through people. And I imagine it would have a pretty interesting effect on potential, client engagements. I don't know where you would draw the line between, this kind of exploration and a coaching engagement, for example.
Mm.
But it does seem like a way to kind of explore some things.
Well, there's one of my mentors is Alan Seale, Seale, and the name of his approach is transformational presence.
Mhm.
So you can go to transformationalpresence.com or org. I think he has two. I think it's com now. And he teaches some interesting techniques that remind me of this parts. And so I did it one time, and it goes like this. So I had this client who was reluctant and is reluctant to speak up in groups or to network. And he is afraid, as it turns out, that people might not like him, or that he will sound like feeling like a fraud, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
And so what I did was this exercise that Alan taught. I said, okay, and it takes a certain kind of client to be able to do this. I said, all right, well, do you know that feeling of feeling like a fraud? That he goes, yeah. I said, well, take that feeling and put it someplace in the room. Just visualize it someplace in the room. And what's amazing is if you have a client who's willing to play,
Mhm.
then they do it. And he says, okay. I said, well, what do you see? He said, I see my 21-year-old self
Mm.
starting my practice and afraid. I said, okay, well, what would you like to tell your 21-year-old self? So we went through that dialogue. And the
Yeah.
thing that's powerful about it is he can't unsee that,
Right.
right? And when he's feeling like a fraud, he now knows that's an old story.
Mhm.
Those are feelings connected to the way he truly felt. Gee, I mean, he's in his 50s now.
Mhm.
And once you can see it, once you acknowledge it's a real piece of me and it's living piece of me, but it doesn't really help. It doesn't have a place in my life now
Mhm.
because I'm a fully formed adult. I've been practicing now for X number of years. I
Mhm.
don't have to feel like a fraud. I actually know stuff. But until that was unhidden, it was haunting.
Yeah.
So sometimes people come up with blobs. Oh, I
Mhm.
see a big blob over there. That's what it looks like, a blob. So people are willing to play, and all kinds of stuff comes out. So that's how I would use it, since I'm not,
Mhm.
an interfamily
Mhm.
systems practitioner.
Yeah.
But there's a truth to it that other thought leaders have integrated into their approach to
Yeah.
coaching.
I always marvel at the way successful coaches and certainly experienced coaches can adapt these this multitude of theories and ideas, and behavioral models, et cetera, into their practice without crossing the boundary into psychoanalysis, and going into what could potentially be very questionable or dangerous ground. Have you ever come across a situation where you had to refer a client, say, this is beyond the ken here, and you know you got to go someplace else?
One time I did, but it was at the very beginning.
Oh, okay.
So I was brought in to work with a woman who was very sort of scattered, very talented, but very scattered and emotionally easily triggered. And so when we sat down, uh, and I said, so how do you want to use our time? And she said like two or three words. She said the word help
Mm.
and burst into tears and
Oh.
basically cried the whole time. So we didn't really get anywhere. And I, came back again, basically same thing happened. And I
Mm.
learned that she wasn't insured. She was feeling depressed and just went to a local clinic. And the person there said, you're crazy.
Oh my God.
And they gave her some medication. They really didn't do what you're supposed to do and see what fits. So they gave her some medication. So we have no idea if she was on the right thing or not, or if whatever. She's not treated correctly. And she has a thyroid condition,
Ooh,
which was untreated because she's not insured and she didn't have a doctor.
wow.
So I said to her, we really can't even begin until you get yourself in a better place. You have to go get a physical checkup,
Yeah.
get your thyroid meds right and make sure you're okay. And if you're depressed, get a referral and get the right meds. And when you're more stabilized,
Mhm.
then we can start our work.
Yeah.
And that's what happened.
It seems that it would be prudent for anybody who's serious about doing executive coaching to at least get some surface knowledge of those issues so that they know when to say when. Is that part of the training? Is that part of the certification process for coaching in general?
Not in any deep way, really.
Mhm.
Just
Yeah.
be aware if somebody has a problem and you can't
Mhm.
handle it, refer them out.
Yeah.
And, you can imagine certain conditions, like if somebody's drinking at work, you can't help that. You may suggest you should get somebody to help you with that addiction. But
Mhm.
no, it's just touched upon as what coaching is and what coaching isn't.
Yeah. Well, what coaching is and what coaching isn't. I mean, you're somewhat of authority on this, Beth, being working at the ICF, and are you? Did I get that right? That you're the incoming president of the New England chapter of the ICF, and
That's
the
right.
ICF, by the way, for our listeners, is the
International Coach Federation. It's a
yeah.
global organization and it has chapters all over the world. And I am the president elect of the New
Mhm.
England chapter. I'll begin in June.
So you're currently serving as VP in
Yes,
the.
I'm on the board. Right.
It's a volunteer organization. Is that
Yes.
right? Yeah. So ICF sets standards and criteria for and certifies the certification courses and provides certification courses yourself, or is all the above? Is that correct?
So the International Coach Federation is analogous to the bar association or the medical association, but we are not regulated profession.
Hmm.
But what it does is it has a set of standards that they have their coaches, their membership adhere to,
Hmm.
and they offer credentialing. So, coach certification is what you get when you study to become a coach, and credentialing is a result of continuing education.
Hmm.
And there are certain elements to a coaching session that is very different from a regular conversation. And so they're called competencies.
Hmm.
And there are 3 levels of credentialing. And as you become a more experienced coach, you have to go through an evaluation to earn the next level of credential. And that is based on the competencies. And as you become a more experienced coach, your coaching session should look a little bit, sound a little bit different than it does when you start off. And so it keeps you growing. And it also has a code of ethics,
Hmm.
which generally there is no code of ethics for coaches. That's why, if any of you listeners want to hire a coach, anybody can call themselves a coach. So if you want really a trained coach, you want to check to see whether they have been certified,
Hmm.
meaning graduated a coaching program, and credentialed. That's not always necessary because there are people who call themselves coaches who can be very helpful.
Yeah.
But if you want a trained coach, then you want a coach that has credentials that are awarded by the International Coach Federation.
Just to kind of, I always try to be like open and honest with my listeners and with my certainly with my guests. And people know out there that I've started a my own, we'll call it a practice, as it were, to help people with their creativity. It's a passion project of mine. It is something that I truly believe in. I want to help and serve in that way. But I'm not a credentialed or certified coach in any way, shape, or form. So I've been rethinking the way that I position myself. Right. I mean, depending on how I work with somebody, it could be a coaching engagement. It could be a more consultative engagement. But that doesn't make me a coach necessarily. So meeting you, Beth, was actually one of the reasons and there's a few others after I met you actually that reinforced this message. But for I think the pandemic has created a lot of thinking time for people, and many of us, I think, who are at a certain point in their life and their career, have said, you know what, I kind of want to help other people, and they see coaching as a really great way to do that. And I do believe that that's true. But you've given me pause and made me think about not pause from doing what I want to do, but certainly an eye to how to move forward in a more methodical way that's going to serve my potential clients and my clients much better. So, it's not saying that I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing. It's just saying that I have to be honest about the way that I represent myself out there in the marketplace.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, you called yourself a coachaltant, right? A coach
yeah, coach consultant, I think
coachsaltant. I love
was
that.
something. Yeah,
I just think it's a matter of truth in advertising. Just if somebody wants what you've got, you'll
yeah,
be helpful.
yeah. And, look, I do plenty of informal coaching in my life as a manager and as a leader,
Yeah, of
and
course.
that's just the way it works. But I really have I've come to really understand more about the field and the different types of coaches that are out there. And, in fact, you were the one that told me about, or helped me to understand the difference between a life coach and an executive coach and so on, and what routes you can take in the whole field. But what I wanted to do actually is ask you, for a couple of things as we head sort of towards the one of my favorite parts of my show, which is where I kind of want to know what you're thinking about the future and such. But you know, first of all, where do you see the industry going?
Yeah. Well, in many ways, coaching is a mission based profession. And the goal is to raise awareness in the population about the benefits of coaching. And the benefit really is to help people feel empowered to live in a way that is most gratifying and aligned with who they are.
Mhm.
So that's the big question. Who am I?
Mm.
None of us really know. I mean, it's a question that becomes more and more complex as we get older. But living a life where you are more aware of your values, aware of what makes you feel strong and good, what zaps your energy and your morale, and to feel like you have the right to be to enjoy your life.
Mhm.
And if you're not getting enjoyment from work, where are you going to get it from? How can you have a big picture of all the different parts of your life and arrange them in a way that you have some places where you feel awesome and accept the fact that there are places where you don't, but not let
Mm.
any one of them define you?
Yeah, that's I'm glad you brought that up because another thing that I've come to understand better over the last several years is it's not always important for one thing to be everything. So people think that they have to get the ultimate amount of satisfaction out of their job, or they must get all the happiness in the world out of an activity or something it is. But more often than not, it seems that it's a combination of these things, and one allows the other or one enables the other. So, as I've been doing this last year, I found that I really enjoy my work as a communicator and as a marketer. It allows me to then have my creative pursuits, which then feed back into my job if I'm lucky. If it's the right, if the opportunity presents itself and the opportunities do present themselves and the windows do open from time to time, then I can merge those worlds together on
Yeah.
occasion. And that's a kind of whole new direction that's giving me a lot of thought, which is just how to bring creativity back into the workplace from what I do outside of
Mhm.
the workplace in my
Yeah,
own
I
free time.
totally agree with you. I mean, what do you have in common, or what do all those different pursuits have in common? You,
Yeah,
the person
yeah,
who's
it's
experiencing them. So, how do you integrate it?
it's been really rewarding, I think, and I'll tell you, a lot less stressful when you can align yourself outside of the workplace with yourself inside the workplace. You shouldn't be two different people,
No, but you should
you know?
know and feel comfortable not being your full self at work. There are certain
Mhm.
behaviors that don't
Clearly.
fit. You just don't do
Yeah.
it, and that's okay. You're not being inauthentic. You're making an intentional choice about which parts of yourself do you want to be, or what do you want to show up at work.
Mhm.
And sometimes people say, oh, well, I have to be fully myself at work, or oh, I have to be fully myself at home, or fully myself with this one, or they're not going to love me. Well,
Mhm.
people are much more complicated than that. And when individuals can intentionally choose which parts, and we're back to the parts, but what aspects, what
Mhm.
strengths, what how do we want to express ourselves? And it can be different in different contexts, and it's not being inauthentic.
Sure. I've talked about this on my show before, where I went through a period of time where I had a manager who was trying to help me to bring my whole self to work. But I fundamentally felt uncomfortable with that. I didn't know why at the time. I was just trying to bring my whole self to work. Okay, I'll try, I'll do it. Because I'm deferential. That's one of the one of the things I also discovered about myself since coming back from Japan is I am a pleaser and overly deferential sometimes. And I think when we first conversed, Beth, I mentioned that to you as well, and we had some laughs about that. But the idea is that I'm glad that I've learned that that's not on me. Like I should just bring the part of myself to work that's appropriate for work.
Yeah.
When I can add more to it from the things that are outside work that make it all more enjoyable for me, then I should, if I have that capability, I should do that. Like if I'm an accountant, for example, and I have this whole side of me outside of work that's a sculptor and a painter, I'm not going to necessarily bring my easel to the office.
Exactly.
Right? But I could kind of, but I could always, in like when I have a moment and looking straight at the numbers and just kind of really being very, very mathematical minded or whatever it is that an accountant does. I like to pick on accountants because I worked for accountants for a long time, but I'm not an accountant. And they are incredibly underrated as creative people because I think it's a very creative profession actually. But how can they then they might enjoy thinking about, well, how can I take that creativity that I just explored on the easel at home in that beautiful sunlit studio I've set up, and looking at the spreadsheet, maybe that gives me a ray of hope and sunshine as I look through my spreadsheets, or maybe that is something that maybe I'm getting inspired in some way, or maybe I can think out of the box. There's so many different things that you can do if you can accept that those are two different worlds and enjoy doing that. I don't know.
I mean, even as basic as setting up the easel in the sunroom and spending time there and feeling refreshed and enlivened, and then you go to the office, you can do your accounting work with a little bit more enjoyment and clarity, and it's less wear and tear because you've regenerated yourself. You don't actually need an easel. You can just bring the refreshed you because you've indulged another part of yourself that is crying out for attention and expression.
Yeah. And that's kind of the way that I like to think of, what I'm doing with my own professional life. These it's not necessarily indulging something that's crying out, more like just trying to really get that, enjoy everything, all parts of what I do. The podcast is an incredible experience, and it's, for all intents and purposes, it's a hobby. I'm doing this because I love it and because I want to, bring information to people, but fundamentally, I'm certainly not getting paid for it. And it's like something I've built. I started out with one microphone, and I keep adding gear, and it has all the earmarks of like my dad as a kid having his toolbox in the basement and just keep adding more tools, to have his hobby, whatever that was, could have been. But, it's an interesting way of looking at things. Before we go, though, I wanted to ask you, though, about the other part of that, the other question I asked, which is you are doing a lot to support the empowerment of women in women executives and women in leadership. What is it that we should know about this? How can we help, and how can our listeners support?
I have to answer it this way. I think I was born ahead of my time because gender was never something that I felt burdened by as a woman. I grew up in a neighborhood of all boys. It's one of those stories, playing football on the streets, and never really knew that being a girl put me at any disadvantage. And I had and I have, thankfully, he's still around, a very powerful dad, very successful and, very tall and impressive person. And that relationship made me feel very empowered. It was just never an issue. And so I never really joined women's things because I was fine. I was fine. When I got older, I had a realization, and I still stand by this, that at the top of that glass ceiling, it doesn't really matter if it's a man or a woman, because what is the corrupting influence is power more than gender. And gender say, oh, well, we don't want women here. It's just a scapegoat for the desire to hold on to power.
Mm.
So it can be, being racist or being ageist or whatever it is. You hold on to power and you come up with a population that somehow doesn't belong. That said, there are more men than women at the top for a variety of reasons. And now that I'm more aware that some people have struggled more, and in fact, when I look back, I probably was held back in some ways because of my gender, but it didn't bother me. It's like,
Mm.
oh, they don't want me here, I'll go somewhere else. But I'm working now with a group of women. I am what they call a guide in this new organization called Chief, CHIEF.com. And it is a networking organization that is for women in the C suite, the CEOs, the COOs, and some senior leaders. And that's why it's called Chief. And these folks in business, they join the organization and they get a lot of different services and speakers and great opportunities for networking and learning. And the organization provides group coaching. So they divide the women into groups of like 8 to 12, and they assign a guide. And I'm a guide so far to 2 groups. I will be signing up for more. And we meet once a month. And these women are predominantly in their 30s. And some of them are running businesses.
Mhm.
Some of them are in the C-suite. Some of them are, in senior positions. And it is so incredibly impressive.
Mm.
Impressive. I definitely was much more naive than that when I was in my 30s.
Yeah.
But the purpose is to help women who have achieved a level of stature and power in an organization to help them stay there. So this isn't an organization, offering a helping hand so people move up. It is to help those women embody the power that they have and to
Mhm.
feel comfortable with it and to be able to speak with other women who are facing similar challenges in the workplace. And my hope would be that when they are there, that they aren't corrupted by power in the same way that
Mm.
men were. And I think it's a very natural thing for people to try to protect their turf.
Sure.
And a lot of ugliness comes out of that. But that's what I'm doing with women. And I have 2 daughters and a son. And, I try to keep my eye open for where I think I can be helpful to them as well.
That's great. I think, I know, I think I would have, I introduced you to Deirdre Breckenridge, who was a guest of mine in the past. And I would love for you guys to get together. So Deirdre, if you're listening, please be on the lookout for Beth's work, and also go to chief.com. You might find some interesting inspiration there. Beth, this has just been, I, I- I've I've got quite a few notes. This has been a great conversation. I knew that it would be so interesting to speak with you, but I knew that I would come out of this learning even more than the last time that I spoke with you. I I thank you for taking the time to come and talk with me. To our listeners, you can find any information you want about Beth at mastermancoaching.com, and it's spelled exactly like it sounds, mastermancoaching.com. Or look for Beth Masterman on LinkedIn. And Beth, is there any and now Chief.com is a good organization that Beth is involved with. Beth, is there any place else that people should go to find out more about you, or anything that they should look for if they want to learn more?
Well, I think you're right. LinkedIn, mastermancoaching.com. I'm a leader at provisors.com. You could find me there. You won't find me at chief.com because they don't have
Okay.
our profiles up. But if anybody wants to learn more about me or get in touch, feel free. I would welcome it. And Dan, you are a natural. You're
Thank you.
easy to speak with, and you make me feel really good about what I know. So thank you
Well,
for that.
it's my pleasure, and that's why I love doing what I do here. And look, I can't thank you enough. I know that we're going to stay in touch, so thank you so much.
My pleasure, and thank you again.
If you enjoyed this episode of The Dan Nessel Show, please head on over to iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or the podcast player of your choice to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. And please don't forget to spread the word. Thanks for listening.